All right, let's get started. Good morning, everyone who's here and everyone who's online. It's good seeing you. I hope you've had a good weekend. And I'm looking forward to this time together, and hope you should be too, because we're in for a good presentation and conversation. So if this is the first time that you've joined one of our forums, I want to welcome you. My name is Robert Gaudier. I am the Executive Director of the Campolo Center for Ministry. We provide these forums for our Campolo Scholars, undergrad and seminary students training for ministry, but we have opened these forums up to the broader Eastern community. So we welcome anyone who's here, faculty, staff, and students, part of the Eastern community, as well as our neighbors, area churches. We're grateful to have others participate and join in these presentations and conversations. Following the forum this morning, we are going to host a luncheon across the way over in the Baird Library, and we invite you to come. If you're on campus and you would like to have lunch with us, you're welcome. If you don't have a meal plan, we will be covering those meals for everybody. And of course, if you do have a meal plan, you can grab your lunch. We'll meet in the Baird Library and continue your conversation with our guest. Also, if you are just learning about the forum, we have them. This is our first of 12 for the rest of the semester. You can sign up and register for these. You can, of course, always welcome to come in person, but you can find a link on the website to register to learn about the future. Some of the ones we have scheduled for the rest of the semester. Register, select the ones you have interest in. You'll get reminders before we meet. So we're hoping to grow the involvement of others and build our community over the semester. So thank you all for being here. Let me quickly introduce our guests. Now, it's a little complicated because Michael and Tom generally travel 2 by 2. It's a feature of their ministry with someone to tell it to. But unfortunately, Tom is sick and he stayed home. So Michael made the trip down, and he was a guest at my house last night, and we've had some time of fellowship. There is a formal biography of them and their families and their history and their education. You can find that at campolocenter.org. I really want to share how I know them. Let me make it more of a personal introduction. All the Campolo Scholars have been given this book, Vintage Sinners and Saints, or Saints and Sinners. And I've been reading through it this semester and thoroughly enjoying meeting these sort of older saints, mothers and fathers, Christian mothers and fathers. And recently, one of the readings referred to them as brothers and sisters. And it really got me thinking about the way in which we can think of these older Christians in the history of the church as siblings, and from different perspectives and different traditions and different identities. And they didn't always get along. They didn't always they didn't always have the same Christology or the same ecclesiology. They had differences in theologies, and yet they're all part of one big messy family with common parents. And so we are like that too. I was thinking about how we, as a group of scholars, the Campolo Scholars, come from many different backgrounds. We have different theological traditions and denominations that have shaped us, different socioeconomic backgrounds, different parts of the country, different genders. There's a lot of diversity amongst us in sort of a microcosm of the wider community at Eastern and the even wider community of our country, and even more so the universal church. And so we need to look at each other as brothers and sisters. We don't always get along, we disagree, but we should be striving to do so out of love. And the segue is to the fact that Michael and Tom have been these like brothers to me. They've listened to me share my story, my struggles, my pains, my history. They have received me and who I am, my flaws. They have practiced the holy art of listening. And their ministry is called Someone to Tell It To, because they believe we all need someone who we can tell it to, tell our story to. It's our story that really comprises who we are. And we have to be receptive to that. And we have to be open and courageous enough to share it. And so for years now, it's been many years, we've had Michael and Tom come and visit Eastern, speak to our students before and our community. And I know some of folks from Eastern have gone to their trainings. They travel around the country offering training to doctors and business people and ministry leaders to become better listeners, because it's so important to see into humanity and those around us and our neighbors, and even in our enemies. And so I'm thrilled that Michael can be here. Tom is online and he's going to contribute as best he can virtually. But Michael's going to lead us and make a presentation. We'll open it up for conversation and questions at the end. And then we'll gather together at 11:30 for lunch. So please join me in welcoming virtually and in person, Michael and Tom.
Good morning. It's good to see all of you. It's great to be here, and thank you, Robert. Robert and I had a very nice time last night, going out to dinner and spending time talking and catching up. And it was sacred. It was holy, and that's what we try to do Tom and I try to do every day. Now I'm going to play both parts here, Michael and Tom, for the most part, and do my best to do that. Normally we do all these things together, and it's rare that we speak separately. And the reason we have this 2x2 model, that is something that's very special to what we do, very unique, is because we believe we're better together. We believe that, especially when you're listening to people and their stories, you hear a lot of hard stories, a lot of really difficult things that are full of pain and brokenness and loneliness, fear and insecurity and grief. I mean, you could go on and on. And especially those of us who are in ministry positions, that's part of the job. And when we are able to do it together, it's less scary. Because sometimes what we hear is hard to hear. And when we know that we're not doing it alone, that we're not entering into a painful place with someone alone, it just makes it so much easier. We can also, one of the things about what we do is we try to maintain confidence. Of course, whenever we're really listening well to someone, closely to someone, and hearing some of their deepest feelings and thoughts and secrets, even, to not be able to, we don't share that with anyone other than if they give us permission, but we can share it together because we both heard it. So that's another reason why we do it 2x2, so that we can be stronger and healthier. We get asked a lot, you listen to people so much, how do you keep yourselves healthy? And one of the reasons is because we do it together, and we can debrief with one another. We can talk about what we just heard. We can help each other respond to it. And that makes a big difference. So just giving you a little bit of background about why we do what we do and how we do it. We're storytellers. So I'm hoping today to tell you a lot of stories that we hope will illuminate the holiness of listening and why it is so important. How many of you, just those of you who are here, raise your hands if you can think of a time or times when you've been listened to well. Well, that's pretty impressive. How many of you can think of a time when you've not been listened to well? Yeah. In most cases, more hands go up with that second question than with the first, because we all know what it's like not to be listened to. I think we all know what it's like to know that someone isn't, maybe they're pretending to, but they're actually not doing it. And we know what that feels like. And most of us think that we're really good listeners, but most of us aren't. And so that's an important thing to understand too, that listening is hard work. It's intentional work. It is work that takes a lot out of us, but it's well worth it when we do it, especially when we do it well. And it does change lives very, very much. We get asked a lot, give me 3 tips, 5 tips, how to listen better. We actually, to be honest, don't like that question or that request, because it's not a matter of necessarily just doing something. I mean, there are things you can do, close your computer screen if somebody's, to put your phone down, make eye contact, put distractions aside, all those things you can do, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're still listening well. You might be pretending to listen well, but it doesn't mean you are. We believe that the number one thing that we must do when to listen well is not so much what we do, but it's what we believe. We must believe that the person in front of us, no matter who it is worthy of being heard. That person is a child of God. That person is sacred. That person has a voice. That person matters. That person has value. Because if we don't believe that, guess what? We're not really going to listen well. We'll tune them out. We might pretend, but we won't listen well. So that if we're going to give any bit of advice on how to listen well, it's you need to believe that every single person is sacred. Every single person has value. Every single person has a voice. And every single person deserves to be heard. Well, it doesn't mean we will like them. It doesn't mean we will agree with them. It doesn't mean that they will be easy to get along with. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily easy. But it does mean that we will listen better. And when people feel heard, sometimes it's not perfect, but some of the differences, the misunderstandings, the conflicts, the just the way we look at people, it can change. It really can change, and it opens doors to better understanding and a better connection. We live in a world, I don't think this is any surprise, but we like to remind people that we live in a world that is more highly connected than ever, electronically, digitally, virtually. Obviously, we can do this today because of that connectivity, and that's tremendous. And throughout the pandemic, we've needed this electronic connectivity in order to stay involved with one another. Tom and I were able to do our work during the pandemic, even though for 5 months we didn't see each other in person in 2020. It was 5 months that we never saw one another. We left our office one day on a Friday, knowing that things were closing down, and we thought for just 2 weeks. 5 months later, it was the first time we saw each other. And here we are 2.5 years later, and things have not necessarily ended the way we all thought they would. And life and the world is different. So that electronic connectivity is wonderful, but we are more emotionally and relationally disconnected than we've ever been before. I mean, that's a fact. And this is before the pandemic, and it's before social media, and it's before so many things could happen online. I mean, for at least the last 30 years, studies will show that more and more people, when studied, when asked, have fewer and fewer friends, fewer and fewer people they can count on to really be heard, who they can trust, who they can feel safe with, who they can be emotionally vulnerable and intimate with. That it has continued to go down over the last 3 or more decades. And so that problem didn't just start 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. It's been going on. And one of the reasons that we started Someone to Tell It To was because we saw that and we wanted to do something about it. Now, to tell you our origin story is Tom graduated or was getting out of seminary, and he got a job as a youth pastor in a church near Harrisburg, where our office is. I was part of that church. I had done some interim pastoral work there for nearly a year. And that work was finished, but I was still part of that congregation. And when Tom came in, the two pastors there asked if I would be a mentor to him as he began his new position as this youth pastor. And I readily agreed. It became very evident the longer we met very quickly that we really had a connection with one another. We became fast friends. I mean, I didn't feel like a mentor for very long. I especially just felt like his friend, like his best friend, because we were able to share and we were able to talk and we were able to be really open and honest and vulnerable with one another. Literally on the second day of the job in the church for Tom, he was confronted with a conflict. The two pastors in the church, I don't know if I'm saying this too strongly, but they kind of hated each other. They didn't get along. And there were two different camps in the church. And one of the pastors came to him on his second day. He didn't know about this, to tell him that, and told him that he needed to choose which camp he was going to be in. Needed to choose between that pastor and the other pastor of who he was going to relate to and believe in and trust. Well, Tom was devastated. He was devastated by that because he had no idea that that situation was there and no idea what to do about it. And I was horrified when I heard what he was told or what he was asked to do. And that really kind of helped to form the basis of the things that we talked about and the ways that we listened and interacted and reacted with one another. And I heard just story after story of Tom's pain as he tried to deal with that situation and being confronted by two camps of people and being told what to do by two camps of people or what not to do, like, you know, and he felt very much in the middle and very much alone in that situation. And I'm just so grateful that I had the opportunity and to be a mentor to him and be a friend to him in what was the hardest circumstance of his life. After he had hoped to at least stay in that position for 5 years when he started, but after I think it was 2.5 years, he had to leave. It just was unconscionable and untenable for him. And he left fairly suddenly, and it was really painful for him. And we continued to talk on almost a daily basis, to see one another, to walk with one another, to pray with one another, to read with one another books that were important to us and that we could talk about. And one day on a walk in a park outside Harrisburg, Tom said to me, as he was trying to discern what he was now going to do with the rest of his life, and how he was going to pick up the shattered pieces of the ministry that he felt he had been called to. And he said, what if we do something together? Didn't necessarily know what that something was, but he said, what if we do something together? And without a hesitation, I said, I would like that. Again, we didn't know what that was going to be, but we began to discern. And because of our own relationship, because of our own connection, Tom came up with the idea that we do something to help people, other people, have those kinds of connections too, in a world that was increasingly becoming disconnected. So that's how Someone to Tell It To was started. The name comes from the Australian author Miles Franklin. Miles was a woman. We thought it was a man at first, but it was a woman, Miles Franklin, who wrote that someone to tell it to is one of the fundamental needs of human beings. Someone to tell it to is one of the fundamental needs of human beings. We all need to be heard. We all need to tell our story. We all need to be validated. We all need to be known. That's how we started. And that's why we started. And from there, we formed this nonprofit. And we're now celebrating our 10th anniversary and really proud of that. Every year, starting the second year, of our work and our ministry, our mission. We had an annual get together, kind of a fundraiser, but a time of inspiration where we bring in speakers. The second year that we had this annual gathering, our speaker was Dr. Tony Campolo. That's how we reached out to him. He said yes without hesitation, gave us a really good price for speaking. I mean, it was tremendous. And that's how we met Robert. It's because of that connection and our reaching out to Tony saying yes, that we began knowing Robert and getting to know him and coming to visit him and doing fun things together with him, and really becoming close to Robert as well. You know, again, forming a connection of intimacy and vulnerability, and just deep friendship. So very proud of that, very happy about that, and thank our original connection with Tony for that, getting to know Robert too. All right, got a million stories to tell, and I want this to be conversational. So if you those of you who are here, raise your hand, or if you have a question or something you want to say, glad to ask that. And I know I'm going to get some help with anybody online who wants to ask something. And if Tom wants to say something, please, let us know so that Tom can be part of this as well as he watches from home. Yes.
How did you know that he was someone you could trust and be vulnerable with?
How did I know that he was someone
You could trust and be vulnerable with?
That's how did I know? Just saying this so for anybody online who couldn't hear this. How did I know that Tom was someone whom I could trust and be vulnerable with and to form this partnership with? That is an excellent question. And you know what? No one's ever asked us that before. So I always mostly ask when people ask new questions, because it gives us a chance to talk about some new things. And so I really appreciate that. And this one's a very easy one to answer, which I appreciate even more. It's because he was so vulnerable with me. He trusted me. And so we'd have to ask him why he trusted me. But the fact that he was so open, so emotionally, we use the term, and this is a biblical term, about being naked and unashamed. Being emotionally, relationally naked and unashamed. And he was that. He absolutely was that. And when I saw that in him, I knew that he was craving that for himself as well. So that it enabled me to be the same and to do the same. I could trust that he wasn't gonna go talking about me negatively to anything I said to other people. I could trust that he would listen and that he wouldn't judge me, that he wouldn't try to fix me or tell me what to do. It was those kinds of things that over time, and it didn't take much time, but over time I realized that he was somebody I could trust. And I still realize that. That's still after 10 plus, it's now 13 years that we've known one another. I still believe that and feel that and hope he does too. And I can see him, and see him on the screen. And you just raise your hand if you would say the same thing. Okay, he did. All right. None at all. I'll pay him later for saying that, for indicating that. So great question. Any others before we go on?
I see that Paulette has a question.
Okay. Paulette, please.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. I hope you are too.
Okay, God bless you. So thank you so much for what you shared so what you shared today. It was actually, you don't know my morning. So, and what I've been going through the last couple of days, and you just ministered to me just in what you spoke about. So my question for you is, so I get this whole relational thing and the importance of this intimacy between individuals and people that come into this group. Now, how would you connect that to evangelism? What if someone had to say to you, you have this organization, how do you specifically tie that into evangelism? How would you explain that?
Okay, great question. Again, I'm not sure it's one we've ever been asked. So this is wonderful. Well, I think basically we believe that we are evangelizing when we model, when we do, when we show love to people, when we show unconditional love to people, when we show grace to people, forgiveness to people, generosity to people, does that make kind-heartedness to people, that is a model that enables people to see, we hope, Jesus in us. That we hope that we're showing people what it means to really love one another, to really be a disciple of Christ. So we never lead with the fact that we're pastors for the most part, because so many people, we know what the challenges the church has today, with many people leaving, with many people doubting, with many people questioning. Those statistics are going down and down as far as church membership, church attendance, people, connecting in congregations. And so we want to be open to everyone. We want no one to feel unsafe, no one to feel as if they're being judged or fixed or anything like that. So we try to model the best we can, being open, being vulnerable, being, kind and caring, compassionate to people, empathetic. And we believe that can be the strongest form of evangelism. And I'm drawing a blank as to who said this, and I knew I would, I think it's in my notes. It's in my notes somewhere, but basically one of the things that we have heard, Tom, is it Niebuhr who said this, that share the gospel and use words if you have to, meaning live it first. That is the strongest way to do it. And that's what we try to do most. And then when people are comfortable with the fact that, okay, we're pastors, we are Christians, and they have questions, and we'd be glad to talk about them, to talk to them about anything, answer any of their questions. But first we try to model to get we hope to gain people's trust.
And so let me ask you something. Let me dig a little bit deeper into that.
Sure.
So we know evangelism as this thing where we're spreading the good news, right, of Jesus Christ, and in order to win souls. And so I guess what I struggle with, and I'm an advocate of small groups. One of the ministries where I've been called to is a women's ministry. Okay. Because women have like all this stuff, and we deal with all these things, trust issues and just vulnerability and feeling we have to be everything to everybody. And so we become this voiceless person that's just like robots, and I can't speak for everybody, but this is a commonality that you find in a lot of women. I believe that there's a little girl in every woman that she needs the space to be free. She wants to be liberated in whatever it is that she has to be liberated from, right? So you have these women or men or whoever in these groups that they can be Christians, but they still need to be ministered to people have to evangelize to them as well. I feel like, because a lot of times people will come to Christ, but they're not truly liberated. They're not really embodying this gospel of this good news. Mm-hmm. So I feel like these small groups, and I guess I'm kind of just speaking this out and kind of asking you to just dig deeper to hear your thoughts on this. Do you feel like what I'm saying makes sense? Like there's still this aspect of ministry where we have to evangelize to even the church within those who claim to be Christians, but we're still living in bondage. We're not exercising the good news.
Absolutely. Absolutely, that's true. The church is full of people who are not liberated. It's full of people who are struggling. It's full of people who are very broken. It's full of people who just feel shame. And from both of us working in the church, we experienced that. We experienced that with people, and the people who would come to us to talk, to ask questions, to unburden themselves. We realized how much pain there was sitting in the pews, how much pain there was just because somebody called themselves as a Christian, just because somebody is a member of a church, even very active in a church. even a leader in the church, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are liberated. It doesn't mean that they have a sense of peace. It doesn't mean that they're even close to God or close to Christ. And so there is something, I think, within each of us, women, male and female, whomever we are, we need to be loved. Simply, we need to be loved. We need to feel that we're loved unconditionally. And that's what we're about. We hope that we're about in listening. We believe that's where love starts. It starts by listening to people, allowing them to tell their story and unburden themselves and be known, not judged, not fixed, but to be known. That's what we all want. So, Tom, are you able, now that we know we can hear well, Paulette, we can hear you very well. Paul, do you have any, Tom, do you have anything you'd like to add to that? I don't know. He looks like he's frozen. Tom, raise your hand if you, yeah, he's frozen.
He may have just stepped out. Yeah, his face is showing. So.
Okay, well, right now he's frozen, so he won't be able to answer, but appreciate it.
It looks like he's.
Tom, are you there? Not yet. Okay, that's fine. Let me tell another story. I'm not sure. 8 years ago, actually, Tom gave a sermon at his church, the church that he had belonged to at that point. And there was a young woman who came up to him. First time she was at the church, he didn't know her, she didn't know him, but something about the message that he gave, and he talked about someone to tell it to, our new ministry, our new work. And she said, my family is going through a terrible, terrible rift. We need someone who would listen to us and maybe help us through it. It's a decade-long crisis we've been involved in. I don't know if this is what you could do, but would you be willing maybe to try? We said yes. And soon enough, we were in Baltimore, Maryland, where this young woman's family, most of her family lived. We met in a Hilton Garden Inn, and we spent 8 hours listening to this family, her 2 sisters and her brother and her parents. So there were 6 of them all together. We listened to them for 8 hours straight. First, one by one, they each got a half hour to come in the room with us and tell their side, their version of the story. And then after we had a little bit of lunch. After lunch, we brought everyone together and we had them talk about whatever they felt safe to share with one another about how they felt about the situation. This is the situation. This young woman who had come up with Tom and her younger sister were sexually assaulted. One of them was raped as preteen girls by another extended member of their family. They did not tell anyone until I think it was maybe 5 years later, because they didn't even know how. They were too young to even know how to articulate what had happened. But one day they did. They told their father, who was a pastor. And if you understand the rules, as a pastor, he was required by law to report it. Him reporting it meant that this family member, it was an uncle to the girls, might go to jail. That's what caused the rift in the family. The father, the pastor's other siblings, were so angry that he did that. And his parents, who were in their 70s at the time, were also so angry and hurt that that happened, that it broke the family apart. And the 6-member family who lived in Baltimore were now considered just the enemy for doing that. There were 2 trials, one for each girl, and the accusations that they made against their uncle made the papers. This family lived in another state, in New England, and they were prominent members of their community. They were embarrassed. Family, particularly the family in New England, embarrassed, horrified that this had to go to trial and it hit the papers, and they were afraid that the business that the family spent decades running and very successfully could fail. They were concerned about reputations. They were concerned about all kinds of things, understandably. And that part of the family in New England wanted nothing to do with the part of the family who lived in Baltimore now. And for 10 years, they didn't speak, except for one time. They tried to get together with the grandparents, the family in Baltimore with the grandparents, and it did not go well. But now, the father, the pastor, the father of these 2 girls, as his parents were nearing 80, he was concerned that the next time he saw his family might be at a funeral for his parents, or at least one of his parents. And he didn't want that to be the first time that he saw his family again. And he wasn't even sure if he'd be allowed to, because of the way they felt. And they wanted some help to work through this, because he wanted at least to reconcile with his parents before they died. He wanted, and most of the members of that 6 members of that nuclear family wanted it too, except for one who was a little bit more not so sure about this. Happened to be the youngest member of the family, who knew the grandparents the least amount of time, and he was still pretty young. And so he didn't have that same connection, and it wasn't as important to him at that time. Anyway, so we were in a hotel room, Baltimore, 8 hours, heard the story. The next thing, and that went well. It went well. We were exhausted. Let me tell you, it wasn't easy, but it went well. The next thing that this family from Baltimore wanted us to do was meet with the parents, the grandparents. And we agreed. And the grandparents agreed to meet with us too, to tell their side of the story. Because why they chose sides, in essence, against that part of the family. So it was arranged. December of that year, they flew us to Providence, Rhode Island, secretly. Felt kind of like spies, I mean, it was a secret, clandestine, because they did not live in Rhode Island. It was another New England state, but they were able to get to Rhode Island fairly easily, because they didn't want their family in New England to know they were meeting, because that family, again, those members of the family did not want them to reconcile with the family in Baltimore. So we met with them and spent a day in a hotel room in another Hilton Garden Inn. And that seemed to be their hotels of choice. And we met with them, the grandparents, and heard their part of the story. The blessing about it, the holy part of, we hope that the listening was the holy part too. But the other holy part was both this family was a strong Christian family. The grandparents wanted to reconcile. Family in Baltimore wanted to reconcile. They just didn't know how. They didn't know how to do it. The pain, the brokenness was just so raw. Where to start? So we arranged over a period of 2 years to have a series of meetings, always meeting in usually a Hilton Garden Inn, mostly in Baltimore. The grandparents would fly down to Baltimore and would meet. First, they met with the 2 girls so that the girls could tell their story and the grandparents could hear it. Every time we met, there was always a moment in the listening where we thought that it was going off the rails. Somebody would say something out of pain, out of anger, out of fear that would not sit well with the others in the room. And it would be awkward, and it would be angry, and it'd be silent. And we were trying to, here we are figuring, what do we say? What do we do? And all of our work is shot. But because that family was willing and wanted to reconcile, they stuck at it. And because we kept listening and we were there, I think kind of as a safety net for them all, they could talk through us. And we could ask questions that weren't as emotionally charged as the questions they might ask. Or we could make observations that weren't as emotionally charged as what they might make. And we were able to continue to stay the course, even when we feared desperately that it was gonna just be shot. 2 years later, the whole family, the 6 from Baltimore and the 2 grandparents, came together in a hotel in Baltimore right before Christmas. We spent the day together, all of us talking, all of us sharing it. Even on that day, there was something said that we thought, oh, it's over. They're not going to do it. They're not going to reconcile. But we got through it. And they did. And I think that was the best Christmas gift that any of us could have received. 2 weeks before Christmas, that family, the grandparents and the 6 from Baltimore, reconciled. And within the last, 8 years now, since probably 6 years since that reconciliation happened, those two granddaughters have gotten married. And when the first one got married, the grandparents were invited, and they went. And the grandmother told us, who we're still in touch with, we talk with every few months. We've gone to visit them in their home in New England, kept in touch, with the family in Baltimore. But the grandmother said to us, without your help, without you listening and getting us through this, we wouldn't have been able to attend those weddings, to see our granddaughters get married, and to celebrate that with our son and our grandchildren. Gosh, listening is what did it. Without judgment, without fixing, with giving everybody the chance to say what they had to say, even harsh stuff that you feel is just going to end the relationship, but to persevere and to be open and to be empathetic. That's when it worked. And I'll just give you another moment when we knew that there was a breakthrough. It was when it was with the 2 girls and their grandparents. The grandfather was having the hardest time understanding why they didn't tell what had happened to them. He couldn't understand why it took them 5 years, whatever it was, to share it. And he had a hard time believing that it was real. And when he was saying that, we're thinking, oh, this is not going to be helpful. The girls might just shut down because they're not being believed by their grandfather. But then the grandmother spoke up. Guess what? she too had been sexually assaulted as a little girl. She had never shared that before. She knew, she realized, I don't know if she had forgotten about it, but at some point in that conversation, she remembered it. And she spoke up and said, I didn't tell anybody either. And that was the beginning of the relationship being mended with granddaughters. The other thing was Tom, sitting next to me, kind of like elbowed me as the grandmother was telling her story and said, maybe it's time for you to speak too. I had my own story as a teenager of someone sexually assaulting me. And one of the things that we will do is we will share our own vulnerability at the right time and in the right place. And that seemed to be the right time and the right place to say, happened to me as well. And I didn't tell anybody for 17 years. And then I told my wife about it because of something that was in the news, big news, that reminded me that I'd almost forgotten about it too. But it reminded me of it. And in telling this story, the grandfather was able to see that it's a very common pattern. People who are assaulted do not tell. It's changing, but especially when it happened to me, and especially even more when it happened to that grandmother, who's now in her 80s, you just didn't talk about that kind of stuff way back when. So, another part of listening is not just being silent. It is being able to share your own story, not to share it to say, oh, look at me, I had this too, in any kind of sense to help us, but being able to share at the appropriate time to help someone else, to know that they're not alone in their story either. So that's just something that we've learned as well. And it's really important for to be vulnerable ourselves at the right time. So, we can talk forever,
Yeah,
but I know that we need to
sure.
probably some more dialogue.
Thank you for your vulnerability with strangers. And I know some may have to go to class at 11, and that's fine.